Hello and welcome to Macabre Mysteries. Like and subscribe and follow on TikTok and Instagram for more scary stories. Serious, what is the creepiest, most blood-chilling thing you, or someone you know have ever experienced? About 10 years ago, I took my dog out for a short walk. We lived in a rundown but historic part of old houses that are either beautifully maintained, abandoned, or generally going to shit. There was a good mix of people in that neighborhood. Anyway, walking the dog, I get about 3 or 4 houses down and stop at the corner while Pony sniffs some grass or whatever. I turn around and suddenly there is a man standing way too close to me. No idea where he came from. I am usually very aware of my surroundings, and Pony hated strange men. I stumbled a few steps back. I immediately had this absolute bone-chilling sick feeling. He asked me, "Is that a pit bull?" And I replied yes. Then he said, "Oh, she'll protect you." At this point, my body flooded with adrenaline and I turned to run back to my house. I saw my mom standing on the porch and thought to yell to her. She had no reason to come out on the porch. I honestly think she had a bad feeling. I don't know what good me yelling really did, but it was all I could think to do. Like, "Hey, look, I'm over here." I've never had such a flight response before or since that encounter. When I was 16, my parents went out of town for a weekend. It was actually pretty sweet because I got to be king of the castle for the weekend. So I get home that Friday night and just stick around, internet, video games, etc., and start watching TV around dusk. The way our living room was set up was that there was a set of glass doors right next to the television that looked out to the back porch/backyard. The backyard was surrounded by ivy that grew on a hill around a 45-degree angle. So I'm just mindlessly channel surfing and I see some movement outside. At first I just dismiss it thinking it's a bird or a neighborhood cat or something, but I then notice that whatever is moving is way bigger than a bird or a cat. I go and put my face near the glass and stare into the backyard, and there's some dude just crouching in the ivy looking into the house. Our eyes meet and he has somewhat of an "oh shit" moment and bolts out of our yard. Scared the shit out me. Man, my house was set up in a very similar way and I have a very similar story. I grew up scared shitless that someone would come up to that glass door at night. We had vertical blinds to block out any prospective peepers, but one night when my folks were out of town, I was up late watching TV on the couch, and all of a sudden there was 2 loud knocks right on the glass. Of course my blood goes cold, but I quickly think that maybe one of my friends who know my parents are out of town snuck out and came over. I work up the courage to go slide open one of the blinds to peek out, fully expecting to see one of my friends. Standing there is some swarthy looking guy with a mustache just looking in at me. He pulls at the door, but it's locked. I booked my ass straight out of the front door and ran straight to my aunt's house a few doors down. We called the police, and they said there were so many footprints in the snow that he had to have been circling around the house for hours. There was even some footprints on the roof by the master bedroom. My mom had a stalker for years. She was maybe in her early 30s. I was about 3 and my brother was around 1 when this started. My dad would leave for work in the morning, and as soon as he was gone, the calls would start coming in. She'd answer the phone and some guy would be saying all this horribly sadistic and sexual things about what he wanted to do to my mom. She was beyond frightened and didn't know what to do. Sometimes the caller would describe what she was wearing at that very minute or describe what she was doing. My parents were struggling financially, so they couldn't just up and move, but my mom started spending more and more time at my dad's mother's house when he was away. The cops got involved, but they couldn't trace the call. Finally, they were able to save up enough money to move. I was about 6 by this time. The phone number was changed and unlisted in the phone book. This was around 1988, when everyone still used landlines. My mom never got another scary phone call, but she had nightmares about it for years. When I was little, I remember going into her bedroom in the morning and she would be sobbing into her pillow. I didn't understand it at that point, but she explained later in life that she'd wake up from a nightmare and just shake and cry. A couple months after we had moved, the cops informed us that they finally caught the guy. It was our next door neighbor's 19-year-old son. He had been in the military but was discharged due to severe mental illness. I guess he was put into some sort of special security home that specializes in mental health. The lead investigator said that the son was obsessed with my mother, and they found a box in his room full of a bunch of photographs candidly taken of her when she was out in the garden or playing with us kids in the yard. It chills me to the bone when I think about it now. Anything could have happened to my mother when my dad was at work and I'd be too young to help her. I was on a 15-hour bus trip from the Yucatan to Chiapas in Mexico with my family. It was late at night, and after several hours of driving, we stopped at a gas station to go to the bathroom, grab snacks, etc. It would have been like any other trip, however I noticed there was an unusual amount of police. When we got back on the bus, the driver informed us that the police had received a tip that our bus was being targeted for a robbery by Mexican bandits. They would escort us. We drove and drove for hours up a nauseatingly winding road on the side of a cliff. One police truck in front of us and one behind us, armed to the nines. I was on high alert, but after a while I dozed off. That was until the bus came to an abrupt stop. I remember peering out the front window and seeing a series of large rocks placed strategically across the road. Everything was dark, save these rocks being illuminated by the bus lights. If the police hadn't been there, this is what would have went down. Step 1. Bus driver disembarks, tries to remove rocks. Step 2. Mexican bandits kill bus driver or holds hostage. Step 3. Bandits board bus. Step 4. Rob, rape, kill. I was 17 years old, white-looking female, I'm healthy, and the rest of my family is Mexican or looks full Mexican, and even then I knew what would have happened to me. Kidnapping for ransom would definitely not have been out of the question, and rape a high guarantee. We were in the middle of nowhere on a bloody fucking mountain. If the policia weren't there, would I be here to tell this story? Probably not. So, this happened senior year of high school. My best friend and I were at her house, which was way up in one of the canyons, and she had a long, winding driveway. We had been there all day and her mom had gone out, and she and I were supposed to go meet a couple friends in Hollywood that night. Anyways, we had been goofing around all day and watching scary movies at whatnot, and we started to get ready. Her bathroom had one of those her double sink deals, so she was near one and I was at the other. All of a sudden I got the creepiest feeling, like all of the hair on my arm stood up and I had this sudden feeling of panic. To this day, it is the most terrified I have ever been. I was putting on eyeliner when it happened, and I caught her eye in the mirror and said, "We need to leave. Right now." I thought she would be like, "What? You're being ridiculous," or what have you, but instead she said, "I know." My blood ran cold when she said it. We left so quickly that we just grabbed what was in front of us. We booked it out of her house and down the driveway, which we weren't supposed to be on BC. Her mom had just had it repaved, and her car was parked down on the street. We rounded the curve in the driveway, and there was an SUV parked dead center in the middle of the street without its lights on. Suddenly, the lights turned on full blast, the SUV blared its horn and took off. We scrambled the rest of the way down, totally ruining the new paving, and were getting into our car and calling the police when her mom pulled up right behind us. To this day, I do not know if it was a robber or what, but the fact that she and I both got the sense of dread at the exact same time creeps me out to no end. Edit. Wow, I was not expecting so much interest / so many responses to this. I haven't had a chance to look at them all yet, but look forward to reading / replying this afternoon. I will say this though, my personal opinion has always been along the lines of what you / Blue and Orange 92 said, in that whoever was in the SUV was the lookout and she flipping on their brights and laying on the horn was to alert whoever else was involved that we were now outside / there had been people in the house, etc. But we'll obviously never know for sure as we saw no one else. And there were no immediate signs of anyone having tried to break in. Was 8 and woke up to an explosion of dog barks and screams coming from our backyard, then the screams trailing down the street. We get outside and my dog is chewing on a bloody shoe and a bit of gym shorts were hanging off the backyard fence. We call the cops, they investigate. From the footprints, they could see the guy tried every window with my dog following. When he got to mine, my dog went full attack mode. The guy was picked up that night on an unrelated charge, but they put two and two together later and charged him. My dog allowed them to collect the gym shorts, but that shoe was his. He was happy and let the cops pet him as much as they liked. Animal control the next day when they drew a little blood for a rabies test. That shoe though was his. When my friend's dad was around 17 years old, he decided to go camping with about 8 or so of his friends. This took place in the Wisconsin forest. When they got to the site, they decided to split up to collect firewood in groups of 2 and meet back at the site in around 20 minutes. One group wasn't back right away, and since they were a couple, they just assumed they were fornicating in some bushes and cracked a couple jokes about it. After around an hour, they decided they should probably go look for them and headed off to search in the area they had been collecting wood. They saw behind a bush part of the girl's bloody shirt, and the man's shoes were lying scattered around the scene. They quickly rushed back to their car so they could drive to the park ranger's office, which was about 5 miles away, and report the incident. However, they found that their gas had been siphoned, so they had no choice but to walk. On their walk back to the office, they saw a semi pass by with one driver and 2 faces pressed up against the window, which they believe were their friends begging for help. The 2 friends were reported missing and have never been found to this day. We had a break-in in the home I lived in as a child. I was about 5 or so, and I used to come home from school, and I would be alone as my sister was at school and my parents were at work. The house was at the bottom of a long driveway too, with a big-ass yard and a huge bush with a river behind it, so it was kind of isolated. One day I came home from school, down the driveway as usual, went to unlock the gate and noticed that our front door was broken, but the gate wasn't. As I said, I was only 5, so I wasn't very smart. I proceeded to open the gate to go in, and as I entered, I heard someone slash a few someones running out the back door. I went into the house and saw that the burglars had broken in through a back window and just took everything. Point of the story is that they were still in the house when I arrived home, and when they heard the front gate opening, they fled out the back as they probably thought it was my dad, who is a police officer. Had they known it was just a 5-year-old kid, who knows what would have happened to me. Makes my fucking blood run cold just thinking about it. I was home for the summer from college, and my mother and brother had just headed out for a few-day trip to visit colleges. This meant I was to take care of my father. Dad. Something was clearly wrong, but we couldn't tell what. He had Parkinson's, but it was more than that. But we figured I could handle him. This is when I came to realize something in his broken mind hated me with a passion. He wouldn't listen to anything I said. Now I admit I was pissed off, so I wasn't doing a terrific job, but even simple things like getting him food was an hour-long ordeal that ended with us shouting. This last time, I called Mom on the house phone because at least he'd listen to her. I gave him one phone and I was on another, yelling at each other through it even though we were 5 feet apart. Poor Mom trying to referee from a few hundred miles away. Finally, Dad hangs up his phone and hands it to me. Oh, he's done. Thank God, I think. But then he tries to take the still active phone from my hand, which I refuse. And that's when it happens. It gives me chills to this day. A change came over him. It was subtle, but he stood slightly straighter. It was like for a moment someone else was in his body. He stared at me, and in the most calm, cold voice I have ever heard, said, "I'm going to kill you." There was no emotion behind it. There was no energy. He said it as fact. I was stunned. Mom heard it over the phone. As I stood there, paralyzed, her voice broke through in a whisper. Key run. I threw the phone at Dad, rounded the corner, and grabbed my keys. My car screamed out of the driveway. It was pure animal instinct for me at that point. I had to run, because if I stayed there, Dad didn't really remember what happened. He was confused as to why I was suddenly gone. I have no idea what went on in his head at that moment, but I stared into something back there. I have posted this twice before, but figured it fits perfectly here, so it bears repeating. For my 5th birthday, my uncle got me a puppet almost identical to this Pee-wee Herman. I was a big Pee-wee fan and loved it at first. In my room, I had bunk beds, and I slept on the bottom bunk, and on the top, I kept all of my favorite toys and stuffed animals. I'd often leave them in really weird formations after having battles, and the like, but I always remembered to leave certain ones in certain places because they were my favorites. Namely my Ninja Turtles and Pee-wee. A few months after getting this toy though, I started to have some really terrible nightmares about it. Not the "are you afraid of the dark" kind of early 90s nightmares for kids, but truly graphic and horrible dreams where someone had broken into our house and made me watch him torture my sisters and my parents while the doll just laughed. Scarring shit. So I told my parents and they immediately got rid of it. This apparently just meant they hid it in the garage since I couldn't see the stuff stored up high anyways. A couple weeks later, I woke up and all my Ninja Turtles were on the floor. Confusing, but maybe I shook the bed a bunch in my sleep. A few days after this, my older sister woke my parents up screaming about a dream she'd just had. It was nearly identical to the dream I had told them about, but I know she'd never heard about it. My parents knew as well, and my mother looked genuinely horrified. I got screamed at for telling my sister about such horrible things, but once it became clear that I really hadn't told her, my mom looked even more worried. I watched her go into the garage, grab Pee-wee, put him in a trash bag, and put him in the dumpster. For years I'd wake up and my stuffed animals would be in really odd places, in places I know I hadn't left them, in places I never would have left them. I was obsessed. When I was 12, I found the Pee-wee toy in a box in the garage. My mom said my dad must have come home, seen it in the trash, and pulled it out. He doesn't remember ever doing that. He swears he didn't even know she threw it away, let alone try to pull it out. TLDR, 5th birthday present might have been a possessed or cursed puppet. It also, seemingly, hated my Ninja Turtles. Me and my sister got 2 tiny clown-like dolls from a family friend when we were kids. They always creeped me and my sister out. We told our parents and they agreed they were creepy. We couldn't even look at them without feeling worried and anxiety. I always had this feeling of dread, like some way somehow they were going to hurt my parents and little sister. So my parents got rid of them. One showed up on my mom's car trunk a few months later, and it scared the fudge out of us. My mom was terrified since she had made sure herself to go dump them somewhere. So she got the doll, put it in the car, drove out, and put it in a nearby trash can. We haven't seen them since, and it's been years, but I still hate thinking about them, and I'm so glad they haven't come back. I used to take care of a developmentally disabled man in a community protection program. He had to be kept away from people because of his sudden violent outbursts. His parents were rich and bought an old farmhouse on 10 acres or so about 4 miles out of town so that he could be away from the public and not forced into a psych ward. For 4 years, I worked there on a 56-hour shift, come in on Sunday evening and leave Wednesday afternoon. There were 2 of us on these shifts, and we were both supposed to be there the entire 56 hours, but because we were the most senior trainers on staff, we'd take turns going home on 1/2 of the nights. After 3 years of being in that house, I had become comfortable with it, despite it being so isolated and overall kind of creepy. I would always stay up and watch TV until around midnight. My client was always locked in his room around 8 p.m. One night, about 12:15 a.m., I turned the TV off and pulled the covers over myself to try and get some sleep on the nastiest futon ever. There was one window in the staff room, and it faced the back of the property and was about 6 feet off the ground. I had just started drifting to sleep when I heard the most blood-curdling woman scream from right outside the window. I popped up so fast that I nearly lost consciousness and had to steady myself in the doorway while the scream continued and then faded away. I grabbed a flashlight from the laundry room and threw open the back door, illuminating the area outside the window, and there was nothing. I ran along the perimeter of the house and saw nothing. I watched the sun come up the next morning, desperately glued to the TV, trying to distract myself from what had happened. All of the people I worked with were much older than me, and there was no good reason to play a prank like that in the middle of January in Eastern Oregon. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it bothers me to this day. I want to see a movie with a friend of mine. It was dark when we got out of the movie, and she offered me a ride home, but it was pretty short walk, nice night, and I live in really safe town. Usually. So I start to walk home. I guess I should mention, I'm a woman, and a particularly small one. About 2 blocks into my walk I hear yelling and screaming/moaning. I look and these 2 guys in hoodies are kicking something, but I can't see what because there is this short cement wall blocking my view. They shout something, nod at me, and take off in the opposite direction. So I run to where they had been. That all happened very quickly. I get there and there is this homeless man. It's really dark, but he's obviously hurt badly. He has a blanket. He was clearly sleeping when these guys came up and attacked him. I actually recognized him, not by name, but it's a small town and I've seen him around. He gets up and grabs his blanket and looks around for a minute. I try to talk to him, but he just can't really talk to me. He's quite mentally ill and has now been hit in the head, and he's just terrified. He takes a couple steps as I'm calling 911 and ends up under a streetlight. His head and face are covered in blood with some dirt caked over it, to the point I can't see any skin on his face. He's way too spooked to let me try to help. I'm explaining to 911 the situation, but mostly just begging for an ambulance. They want to know about the 2 guys, of course, but I didn't see them well, and I have this guy bleeding from his head in front of me. And then he starts walking. I have no way to stop him, so I just follow a little bit behind, because I don't want to be an extra thing that terrifies him, but I also need to update 911 where we are. We made it like 8 blocks before the fire truck intercepted us. I am shocked he makes it that far. No one else is out. 911 keeps wanting me to give a more detailed description, which is the one point I lost it a little bit. He's the only guy covered in blood walking down street name. Sorry 911 operator. I cannot describe how relieved I was when the fire truck showed up. The police talked to me for a little bit. Then they left. The guy had been transported and the fire truck was gone. All of a sudden everyone was gone and I was just standing there on an empty street in the dark. I took a step to start to walk home, now farther than where I started, and decided to call my friend instead. She drove back and took me home. The guy with the head injury lived. The 2 terrible humans who did that were never caught. On April 18th of this year, I came home from work and began working on some homework. After 30 minutes of homework, my aunt entered my mother's bedroom and began screaming hysterically, ordering me to call 911. Once I was on the line with the operator, she asked what the nature of my emergency was. I didn't quite know, so I entered my mother's bedroom to find her dead of a heart attack and laying face down on the floor, wedged between her nightstand and her bed. The operator dispatched the paramedics and instructed me on how to perform CPR. In order to do so, I had to flip my mother onto her back. When I grabbed my mother's cold, lifeless arm, I realized that she couldn't be moved as she was wedged firmly between her bed and her nightstand, and rigor mortis had already set in. I was unable to flip her over, and I had never seen or touched a dead body before. After the paramedics came and told me that nothing could be done, the medical examiner informed my family that she couldn't be seen as she had been laying on her face for so long. It's assumed by my family that she hit her head on the way down as her dentures were on the floor beside her. The combination of her head trauma and the fact that she had been dead for many hours had rendered her unviewable, as deemed by the officer from the medical examiner's office. To answer your question, the sight and feeling of my mother's deceased body is the most chilling thing that I have ever seen. Her memorial is this Sunday. Edit. I really appreciate the condolences and heartfelt messages you've sent me. I'm proud to have a great support network, outside of the internet, full of people who have put themselves out there for me. I just started my move into my new home and will be sleeping there for the 2nd time tonight. My new home is the spare bedroom of an old music teacher of mine. After his daughter and grandson moved out, I've been fortunate enough to be offered a room free of charge to live in. This is an amazing opportunity, especially for a college student whose job only offers 20 hours a week. I hope only to be able to repay him for what he and his wife have done for me. Oh, I love these threads. I hope this one takes off so I can add it to my collection of save links. As for me, the creepiest thing that ever happened was when I was 5. My mom, my sister, and I were living in a small trailer in a rural town in Gav. My sister and I went to bed, and a little while later my mom followed suit. Around 11 p.m. my mom heard me calling out, "Mama, Mama." She checked the bedroom and didn't see me in there. She knew I sleepwalked, so she started checking the rest of the trailer. She didn't find me anywhere, and I had stopped calling her. She had checked under furniture, in closets, in appliances. I liked to hide in the dryer at that age, in the kitchen cabinets. She eventually found me standing outside on the front porch in my underwear. She never figured out how I got outside, as the front and back doors were locked by the handle and by chain locks. The windows were shut and were a type that can only be shut from the inside. I feel like this will get buried, but when I was in primary school, this old man used to work on the playground. He'd just monitor the children and make sure everything was okay. He'd always invite me over for dinner and used to talk about his wife who was at home waiting for him to get back. He used to tell me about his dogs and say that I could feed them treats if I met them. I used to beg my mom to let me go to his house, and she would always outright refuse. I was bummed because his house sounded fun and I wanted to meet his dogs, but my mom's word was the law, so I got over it. He somehow found out my address and sent me a Christmas card one year. Fast forward to when I'm in secondary school and his name is all over the paper. Sentenced for raping a 6-year-old girl. It also turned out that his wife had died years ago. I was only 8 when I knew him, but I still remember what he looked like, and I'll always be glad that my mom was so protective. When I was a freshman in high school, my cousin was huge into JROTC and the Army and was admitted to West Point. However, he was shot and killed the winter of his senior year in high school and was buried in Army service dress. Fast forward to that summer, I was attending encampment as part of Civil Air Patrol, which is like a week-long basic training for new cadets. At graduation, we were all standing on the parade field in the 90-degree Virginia summer heat when suddenly I felt ice cold. I looked across the field to the bleachers where our parents were sitting, and standing in front of the bleachers was a pale white figure in full Army service dress, clearly blocking the view of quite a few people for the whole ceremony. Nobody else was standing, and nobody asked him to sit, even though there were also many people in uniform sitting down. I kept my eye on the figure the whole time, which stood completely still at parade rest the entirety that I could see it, but after the pass in review was complete and we returned to our spots on the field, the figure was gone. After the ceremony was over, I asked everyone in my flight if they had seen the figure, and everyone said they didn't see anyone by that description. To this day, I am 100% sure it was my cousin coming back one last time to see me off. When I was around 7 or 8, my mom's dad was sick. He was old and had been sick a while, and she was stressed about not being there in the end. The last time we seen my granddad was about 2 weeks before he passed away. My mom was upset and was telling her brothers to phone her as soon as he got worse, and they promised to. My granddad, being the man, he has called my mother over to his bed and told her, "Don't worry, I'll not leave without saying goodbye to my daughter." Fast forward 2 weeks and it's 3 in the morning. Everyone is upstairs fast asleep and the house is shut up tight. The living room door begins to slam. I mean repeated slams and bangs about 15-20 times until we're all awake and peering down the stairs into the darkness. My dad parts the sea of kids and sleepily walks downstairs to find no one. My mom says at this point it was her dad saying goodbye, and as soon as she finished that sentence the phone rang. It was her brother telling her that my granddad was gone. Still makes me shiver. Posted this before to a similar Ask Reddit question, but have 2 more to add. I saw a man get shot pretty much point blank in the face in early 2000s. I was in a bar in Moscow waiting for a friend chatting with the bartender. I hear commotion next to me as I see a guy take a step back, whip out a gun, point at a guy's face, and pull a trigger. The guy just slumped and hit the floor, and that's when I saw blood. Immediate ringing in the ears, screams, and folks froze as we thought this guy will continue shooting. Turns out, the guy was in the police force and shot this guy as he was part of some sort of a gang who have murdered another cop from his station. I was around 10, very early 90s. We've just moved to Moscow from a small town in Siberia and bought new furniture. Turns out the furniture store forgot one of the items and said that someone will drop it off tomorrow. Not uncommon in Russia, kids were okay being home alone even at 10. So I am at home after school when two dudes knock on the door carrying a box saying that they are from the furniture store. They were not. I got tied up and roughed up, and they robbed the house clean but left me alive. I was able to identify one of them a year later while the other one was killed in a car accident. Karma equals bitch. The first guy got 7 years of hard labor, and I am sure has been releasing silent farts from the first day there. Also Moscow 93 when Yeltsin decided to fire upon the Duma. Just the amount of dead people laid out to be identified by their relatives, wailing mothers and wives. The smell of burnt rubber and crackling glass under feet. What struck me the most was how there would be a janitor next to some bigwig politicians laying there side by side with their head propped up on the brick, all equal in death. That one scared me for a while, as of course my friend and I snuck out without our parents knowing. I guess the lesson learned there was that at the end of the game, all chess pieces go into the same box. TLDR, saw a guy get shot point blank in the face. Been tied up and roughed up by two Chechenian dudes who robbed our apartment. Front and center as a kid during the 93 putsch, tanks, small arms fire, dead folks being laid out to be identified. I was on a business trip from San Fran to LA. Last day in town, I finish early and head to, the beach. Stop by a pay phone, call the airline. May I please have a later flight so I can watch the sunset from the beach? Nice airline lady says it's done. Later that night, I get home. My wife is laughing her ass off. I knew you weren't dead, she kept saying. Turns out, the owners of the company I worked for, the same guys that had bought the original tickets for the flight, had been calling her, telling her how sorry they were for her loss. My supervisor was in tears, and wifey is laughing, telling them all I'm not dead. My original flight home was that Southwest Airlines flight from the 80s where a disgruntled baggage handler had gotten on the plane with a pistol and put a bullet in the backs of the heads of the two pilots. The plane crashed and burned, killing all on board, near San Luis Obispo. It was a good sunset on the beach. I was in Vegas last year with my brother. We both like to party hard, still in our 20s. Walking down the strip, I see two guys with backpacks on. I know what that means. I say, damn, wish we had some weed. They immediately turn around and offer us other things as well, and we took down his number to get other things later in the night. Hours later, after tons and tons of booze and stuff, we call this guy up for more. When we met these two guys, they were on foot. The second time though, we had to meet them in front of a hotel because they were driving. So he tells us to hop in for a few so we can get what we need without people watching. Now at this point, my brother and I are fucked up and don't realize what's happening until it starts to get dark. We had only been driving for 10 minutes, but we were obviously off the strip, away from the lights, people, anything. This guy is driving like a goddamn maniac, with music blasting, so it was a bit distracting. My brother finally asks them where we're going. They say we're heading to a liquor store real quick, and then they'll drop us back off, but it seems like we're in the middle of nowhere. Finally realizing the situation we're in, we open the doors while we're stopped at a light and run to the only thing we see, a gas station. We flagged down a cab that drove by a few minutes later, which he says is illegal, but we were obviously in need of help. After we told him what happened, he calmly tells us there is no liquor store over here. It was the worst and best feeling ever. We narrowly escaped God knows what and stayed silent for the rest of the night. TLDR, don't get into cars with strangers, especially while under the influence. I can second this. One night in DC, I got separated from my group looking for a hookah bar we went to the weekend before. I was asking people on the street where this place was because its entrance was in an alley. So I ask these guys where this place is, and they tell me to follow them. We start talking, and they give me the nickname Ricky Bobby for whatever reason. I start seeing that we're getting close to the end of the business area and getting into a residential part. I started to get a weird feeling that they aren't taking me where I want to go. Went from drunk to sober in an instant. As we are getting away from the people that are out and about, it became harder to break away from those two. I remember that a group of girls were pulling out of a car garage and they were blocking the sidewalk. The guys instantly start catcalling the girls. I remember that one of the guys opened the rear passenger door to talk to one of the girls. The girl wasn't feeling it, but I suddenly had the urge to hop in. So I did. When I hopped in, I knew it threw the girls for a loop. I can't blame them. Who hops in a stranger's car for a ride? I remember slamming the door and just tell them to drive and drop me off a few blocks down. Ended up missing the metro and walked most of the way home, about 30 blocks. TLDR, don't go walking with random people, especially while under the influence, smiley face. This is probably not going to be seen, but that's okay. So my cousin used to be a divorce lawyer in Arkansas. He was representing the wife. Husband was abusive and kinda crazy. Well, husband starting believing wife was with my cousin. So he kidnapped my cousin, tied him up and put him in the basement. Beat him and dripped acid on him for 3 fucking days. On the 3rd day, husband said he would go get wife, make her watch cousin die then kill wife. So husband left, cousin somewhat untied himself. Got out of the house and rolled down the street until someone picked him up. The couple that found him were scared and dumped him into a Walmart parking lot and called 911. 100% true. Thank you for watching and please subscribe for more.